Thank you, Heidi. I'm pleased to see there are so many of you still here, and I think that reflects the importance of the topic that we've got in hand. So my job as chair is really to keep this to time and to ensure some equity and make sure that there is a balance to both sides, but also just to give you a very brief introduction, and I don't want to steal either side's thunder. And I think most of you know what this is about. This is about the possibility of a national formulary for NHS England. So those of you who are not from England, please accept apologies that this is very England-centric. And what I have seen in the wound care press has been some significant reaction to this. Now, some of that has been more measured than others, but I think a lot of it has come from a position of people not being entirely clear about what is going on. I think that would be a fair reflection. And I think the organisations involved would be quite happy to put their hands up and say, perhaps there should have been a little bit more information up front, perhaps there should have been a little bit more transparency. But it is what it is, that is done. We are now at a point where there is a piece of work that needs to be done, and that is going to move forward. And in terms of what is going to happen, I think we would all agree, because locally, I know you are all looking at your formularies, we all accept that even before Lord Carter made his pronouncements and the 5-year forward view came along, we all knew that there was a challenge around finance. We all knew that it's not just, money that pours in from nowhere. That's yours and mine's tax money. And we want to practice in a way that is not just clinically effective, but also cost effective, because we are in a time of resource constraints. So locally, you are all looking at trying to get the best from the products you've got. And I know many of you are looking at changing from product A to product B because you believe that you can maintain quality but achieve a cost saving. Would that be fair? I also know there have been other national initiatives. So those of you who know me will know I've only fairly recently left Wales and been very involved in the Welsh National Formulary, which is now in its second iteration, and I know the work that's gone into that. So this is no small undertaking. The Welsh National Formulary has involved a huge amount of time and effort from clinicians, and we are very fortunate to have just down the road from us here the Surgical Materials Testing Laboratory, who have supported those statements and the scope of that product. So where we have been looking at trying to make decisions about products, it's not just clinical evaluation, which is very important, it's also been some proper lab tests. And for me, and I think a theme of this conference has been very much about that rounded evidence. It's not just been about the RCT, it's been about experience as well. So I think we know about that. But I also think we need to be very pragmatic about where we are. And if you think about the effort, and I've spoken to several of you, and you've all said the same thing to me about, if only we could share things a bit more. Everybody seems to be doing a piece of work. So everybody's looking at their formulary, and depending on how good your relationships are with your neighbours, you share that or you do the same. Some of you have not quite as good a relationship, or there's some conflict. But the point is, everybody is doing a lot of hard work. And if you imagine that every organisation may be doing a formulary, so I just did some quick figures, and I know there are more than 150 trusts in NHS England. I know there are, but I picked it because it was an easy number. If you imagine that you have a formulary meeting 4 times a year for 2 hours, and there are 4 people come to that. Now, most formulary meetings I've been to, there's been a lot more than 4 people. But if you say 4 people, 4 times a year for 2 hours across 150 trusts, that's 3,600 hours of clinical time involved in you all looking at your formularies. So that is quite a lot of time. So there may be some benefits in some more joined up working, but there also has to be a recognition of all the work that is already in place. And I think that will be what is done. So we've got 2 presentations, and I am sure that there will be a lot of debate afterwards, but what I'm going to do is run the presentations back to back, no heckling, no questions, and we will then take questions. Now, I know the order I've got on my programme is Richard is going first, but Richard, I hope you would agree given that I think a lot of the problem is people don't actually know what is happening, it would make more sense to hear it from the people who are going to deliver the programme first, and then hear Richard's points he has to make about that. So we're going to invite Mandy to come up to the front first. So Mandy Sunderland is from Nottingham University Hospital's NHS Trust, but she's also the person who's instigated the National Clinical Evaluation team, some of whom are at the front. And I would ask Mandy if she would just introduce the team, because I know one of the anxieties a lot of people have got is we don't know who these people are. So would you mind doing that first, Mandy? Thank you very much. And you have 20 minutes each. I can. But what I'll do is I'll wave at Sian, and Sian can, because I'm going to sit over there. Okay.
Okay. Am I going to work? Oh, I am. How exciting. Thank you. Because I'm not going to use all of my slides, because I only have 20 minutes. Just to reiterate, thank you so much for inviting us to come and talk to you. As stated, I'm Mandy Sunderland. I'm a chief nurse at Nottingham University Hospitals. I have been a jobbing NHS nurse for 30-something years. I have always worked for the NHS, and it is my passion. I do not work for Supply Chain, I do not work for any suppliers, and I don't work for the Department of Health. So let's get that right up front before we go any further, because I think there were some myths when this all started. I think it's important that you just understand a little bit about this journey and how I got involved in it. The answer to that is I don't know. I got asked by the Royal College of Nursing about 4 years ago to sit on something called the NHS Supply Chain Customer Board. Exactly, what's one of them, I said. I think the meetings were held in Birmingham. I worked in Birmingham at the time, and therefore I was the token nurse that was invited to sit on the board. In a nutshell, this was about various great and good people from procurement and finance in the NHS whose job it was to monitor the NHS supply chain contract. I sat there for a year or two, thinking this is a day of my life I will never get back again. And suddenly, though, 4 years ago, 3 years ago, when the finances really started to bite, and I was starting to listen to some of the numbers, I started to think, hang on a minute, is there an opportunity for us as nurses and midwives to make alternative savings or offer up alternative savings that don't come from the front line? As a chief nurse in a huge acute NHS trust, I have had increasing nursing CIPs year on year. So my conversation with my Director of Finance at the time when I was working in Birmingham was, if I find my nursing CIP from somewhere else and not nursing post, does it matter? His answer was, no, I don't care where you get it from. So, to cut a long story short, using our Nursing Midwifery Board at Heart of England, and if any of you want to know any more about that, it's in the Big Difference, Small Changes RCN publication, where there are various case studies. And by standardising some of the most common things that we had the gift over as nurses and midwives, i.e. pod products, disposable curtains, anti-embolism stockings, some of those things we saved $780,000 in 3 months. That is nearly a ward. And I met my CIP that year in 5 months and didn't have to touch a single post. So that's why I'm here, okay? This is about us as nurses and midwives doing our bit for what is an NHS in crisis, but offering up an alternative to what is always seen as the easy option, and that is our frontline clinical posts. And that will always be so because we are the largest workforce with the largest pay bill. So that's where I'm coming from, okay, with all of this. So, you know, I don't really want to go into this in any detail. You know the history at the moment, apart from the fact, you know, we're facing a $2 billion overspend as an NHS. Carter, again, don't want to spend any detail on that, apart from the last bullet point there, which many of you will be familiar with, which was about the single national catalogue to improve inventory management and clinical involvement. Did you know there are about 300,000 items on the NHS supply chain catalogue? 300,000. Tesco's has about 4,000. So work that one out for yourself. So when we started to look at if we were to standardise across the English NHS, some of the most common things that nurses and midwives use, what would that mean? And so those figures, I think, speak for themselves. We managed to put, so I asked the finance guys to put nurses on the numbers. It's about 30,000 for a Band 5 nurse with on-costs. So if we standardised and made these savings, what would it save in nurses? And those are the figures. So 776 Band 5 nurses if we were to do that standardisation by the end of next year. Okay, so just the current customer board, which I won't bore you with, apart from, I mean, I know it looks a little bit like something out of MI5 or something, doesn't it? You know, Interpol, Most Wanted. But as you can see, I am the clinician who sits on the customer board. Now, as a result of this, I established what is now the NHS Clinical Reference Board, and these are the some of the most senior nurses in the trust who have the influence to make decisions, either because they are from very large organisations, because they represent some of the largest professional organisations like the Royal College of Nursing, and we did have the TDA and Monitor, but now NHSI on the group, and also colleagues from mental health, from community, and most recently, ambulance trusts. Now, having Sandy from an ambulance trust was a very salutary moment. Do you know, in most trusts, most ambulance trusts, you dial 999, you've got chest pain, ambulance turns up, puts the electrodes on your chest, does your ECG and says, oh, don't like the look of that, we're taking you to A&E. The minute you get to A&E, we take those electrodes off and put them in the bin because in the acute sector A&Es, we don't use the same ones as the ambulance service do because we all don't get together to come up with the common sense of standardising an ECG electrode. It's actually, when you think about it, quite shocking, isn't it? And it's actually when you think, what would the taxpayer think if they knew that we did that? Now, when that was brought to our attention, we made a decision on this group, because we can, and because we're nurses and we like to get things done. Sandy's talking to all the directors of nursing in the ambulance trust. All of us in the large acutes are going to do a diktat to our A&Es, and we're going to do a pilot. And we're going to see, because we know there is evidence that there is no difference, really, clinical difference in these ECG electrodes. But because the ambulance trusts are a lot smaller than the big acutes, they are doing their own deals and not getting a very good price. So that's an example. So these are the objectives of the Clinical Reference Board. We meet every 2 months, and really they have been the drivers in relation to the project that I'm going to talk to you about now. The clinical evaluation team, who the furore has been about, and we have 3 of them here, and I'll let them introduce themselves in a minute, are a group of NHS clinical jobbing nurses who have been seconded initially for a period of 6 months by money made available by the Department of Health in order to do some national product evaluation. It is as simple as that. Most of them are they all are exactly the same as all of you. Some of them haven't come full time yet, so they're still jobbing nurses in their own trusts. This was a national advert that went out across the NHS in England, and there was a competitive process to appoint these nurses. And this is who we have to date. And 3 of them are here, and I'll let them introduce themselves in a minute. What's the purpose of this project? It is to standardise some of the most common products that nurses and midwives use nationally. In a nutshell, that is what this is all about. And it was so great, Naomi, having your talk about some of the lack of evidence about some of the things that we use. The fact, thank you, that there are all of us spending lots and lots of clinical time coming up with local formularies. Well, wouldn't it be an awful lot more sensible if we had a national one? Because actually the evidence is the evidence. And the other thing that I want to make crystal clear, because if this wasn't the case, I wouldn't be stood here today, is that this isn't about the cheapest. We all know what happens when we buy the cheapest. We use 2 of them or 3 of them because they don't work. Okay? This is about using the best products that have been proven by all of our different work streams to be the most value for money because they are clinically effective. The savings come for the NHS by the amount of procurement in bulk we can do nationally. Okay? So I just want that to be absolutely upfront at the beginning. Okay, so the remit of the National Clinical Evaluation Team is there for you. You can all read that. But as I said again, this is about for the NHS by the NHS. I'm not going to talk about small changes, big differences in any detail. You probably are familiar with it. If not, you can go onto the RCM website. It is the first, if you like, product of the work that I was doing with the Clinical Reference Board, and there's lots of examples of best practice here about nurses and midwives getting involved in procuring products. Okay, I'm not going to go through those. Now, standardisation. I'm using a Nottingham example because I can and because I've had access to it. And actually, David Newton, who is the clinical procurement matron at Nottingham University Hospitals, led on this project, so he can answer any questions that anybody may have afterwards. But for me, this is just so simple and a non-brainer. We all know the impact of catheter-associated UTIs on patients. We know it makes elderly patients confused, we get delirium, we get falls, we get longer hospital stay, as well as the discomfort. So what we did at NUH was standardise our urinary catheters into an aseptic pack and then release them. There's your aseptic pack, release them across the whole trust and withdraw any other variations. So what did that mean? A 55% reduction in catheter-required UTIs. Earthquake. It was that good. That's how good it was. So what that meant is just £111,000 in the actual products in standardising. But what we haven't been able to do is put a cost on the reduction in length of stay, the least amount of antibiotic usage, and also lack of distress for the patients. So if there's any evidence we need about standardisation, I think this is a really good example. Okay, why am I here? This is about wound care because the first product area that the national team are going to be looking at is wound care. Now, that is because nurses in the RCN study and nursing time study that was done last year said that 74% of those nurses said that there were greater opportunities of standardising and making efficiency saving in dressings. So that's why we're going there first. Okay, again, lots of facts and figures, but basically, some of the deals that are done with dressings are so inequitable across the NHS. I am in a trust with an £840 million turnover, 1,400 beds. So my procurement department can do much better deals than, for example, don't know if there's anybody here because they're pretty local, George Eliot, which is a small district general hospital down the road with 300 beds. That is, for me, the inequity there of their buying power compared to ours means that they get a worse deal than we do. Again, no-brainer. Not going to go through the case study. So, progress to date. This is where the controversy came from at Christmas. NHS Supply Chain brought together nearly 30 tissue viability, infection control, clinical procurement nurses to start to look at wound care. These were all, again, nurses in practice. They weren't the ones employed by Supply Chain. They were all coming together from NHS trusts to look at 7 categories of products. Okay? And those were the products that they were reviewing. Now, even for me, it seems to me shocking that there are 374 types of film dressings that we can access in the NHS. 165 contact lists, 470 foam dressings. So what the purpose of that project was to look at, using best evidence, standardisation and whittling that down. Okay? So, as you know, I think there was some misrepresentation there about what we were trying to do, and that there was a view that NHS supply chain were trying to dictate to the NHS. Actually, nothing could have been further from the truth. The NHS nurses were advising in relation to that. However, I agree with Jacqui. I think the messaging was all wrong and it wasn't made crystal clear to the NHS and everybody else involved in that. So, on the back of Lord Carter's work and the fact that I also sat on Lord Carter's board, we were given this amazing opportunity where the Treasury has made 600,000 available to us to employ this independent set of very experienced nurses to do this independent evaluation to start the standardisation. So, in a nutshell, that's what this is all about. And we are urging everybody, absolutely everybody, to get involved with us wherever you work. And I'm getting 2 or 3 people contacting me weekly that they will be part of the clinical evaluation. Okay, so they only started 2 weeks ago. Some of them haven't even started full time, and as I said, we've got 3 in here at the moment who I'll introduce. This team are part of the NHS, working for the NHS, and if you like, facilitating your involvement in this project through their contacts, where they work, and getting as many of us involved as possible. There is going to be a very robust clinical evaluation framework, which is being worked on at the moment, and we're very happy to share that, send it out for consultation, get people involved. This isn't a secret. This is about clinicians in the NHS coming up with the best value products so that we can save money and protect the front line. So that's a very quick whistle-stop tour. There's a lot more detail behind it, but I've only got 20 minutes. But actually, before I finish, if I could just ask the 3 brave souls in the team just to stand up and wave to your colleagues. Wave. Okay, I'll just introduce who you are and where you come from.
Can I then invite our second speaker to the floor, who is Professor Richard White, who is a consultant and professor of tissue viability, who is going to put forward some of his concerns, I believe, Richard. Yeah, and again, right. 20 minutes or I will flash.
Am I wired up? Thanks very much, Jacqui. It was a good idea to put Mandy on first because I can rephrase my approach quite considerably. I've been associated with tissue viability since the late 80s. That's quite a long time. But I'm not really here to represent anyone other than myself, although I do hope that the things I say are in accord with your wishes. And if they aren't, I'm sure you'll tell me afterwards or mention it. But I have tried my utmost to take what I perceive to be your concerns into mind. And for the purposes of the debate, Mandy, I've based everything on what I have known up to the point at which you came on board. So, to some degree, I'm about to comment on stuff that predates your involvement. What has happened last year, the correspondence that's gone in the journals, and the correspondence that's been sent through the House of Lords that has been posted on the House of Lords website. So this is open for all of you, and I just hope that some of my concerns may be reflected in the activities that you undertake to avoid making what I think could be the same mistake twice. This is where I'm starting from, and this is where I hope you're with me. We've heard Mandy speak about savings. We've heard Mandy speak about staff numbers, but we haven't heard Mandy say anything about the quality of care delivered. Make no mistake, the NHS is under pressure for finance, but we live in one of the richest countries in the world. This is not a third world banana republic. This is the UK, one of the richest countries in the world. We need to get our priorities politically correct before we start doing anything that could compromise patient care. There's also a science, and I use the word science very carefully, called health economics, which all too often is overlooked. You know what health economics is as well as I do, or at least you should do. Where's the health economic formal component in judging value for money? Outcomes related to cost. We can't have it both ways. You can't have a quick and dirty job, not that I'm suggesting that this will be, but you'll pick me up later. On the same hand, as we ask for formal approaches to gathering evidence and looking at the costs and getting clinical outcomes in the same calculation. We have to bear that in mind. In saying that, I have to say I'm not against reducing costs, and there is a lot of nonsense. The illustration about the patients coming in from the ambulance with electrodes that are deemed not appropriate for A&E, to me, points the finger at the A&E folks. Why the hell are they taking them off? These are CE marked products. They work. The fault is not with the product or the availability. It's with the folks in A&E who seem, for some unknown reason, fit to take them off. That's the nub of the problem there, I think, and that's where I would focus. What I understood from last year, because this project started last year, and an eminent nurse called Susan Hinchliffe was involved. She's disappeared from the scene now, we don't know why. But as a Nottingham nurse, I suspect there are people who know why. The rationale seemed only to be cut costs. I want to see a component in this whole exercise where patient care is measured. Yes, you can cut costs, but at what cost to the patient? Are they going to suffer? We don't have a baseline of what we achieve in tissue viability, so it's going to be difficult to do. But are we going to go through an exercise whereby we save so many millions of pounds, and only you guys at the front line who are treating the patients know that their lot has not improved and may even have deteriorated? By then it's too late. The job's done. The deal's finished. You live and work with what you get. So there's a reason for you to get involved. Now, Where's the evidence? Let's look at the evidence for undertaking this. Purely, let's save money, to me, is not a rationale. And I'll expand on this. The methodology. Are we going to embark on a study with validated methodology? Are we going to get a publication of the results? Will there be a measure to judge the impact on clinical performance, clinical outcomes? Or will it simply be, great folks, you've really done well, we've saved £30 million. And to hell with the poor so-and-so with a wound. Contributors, that's been clarified. Last year there were all and sundry involved in the exercise, most of them from NHS procurement, and I took a look at the list and thought, what the hell are they doing there? They're not clinicians. At least now we've got 7 clinicians, and in you, a lot of trust is being placed. Make no mistake, a lot rests on your shoulders. Communication has been absolutely appalling. Absolutely damned, I want to swear, but I'm not, appalling. The outcomes. What are the outcomes that we're going to look for? When a student comes to me, an undergraduate, with a project and says, look, Prof, I want to do this. If it's configured like this was last year, quite honestly, and I'm not saying this for effect, I'd pass it back to them and say, this is rubbish. I'm not going to let you do this project. It's built on sand. It's got no discernible targets, outcomes, measures. You're not doing this. It wouldn't satisfy the department in which I work or you as a student to do a piece of work like this. Should the focus be here or should it be elsewhere? I'll tell you that. This figure of 74% that Mandy's mentioned, this is quoted by Lord Pryor in this House of Lords response. Pryor works with Carter. And I'll read this out because you can read it yourself. 74% of respondents saw opportunities to reduce duplication on wound care products. Now, has anyone looked where that 74% has come from? Mandy, have you looked where that 74% come from? It's quoted as a Nursing Times article. But it wasn't a Nursing Times article. The Nursing Times was reporting on Cowman and Moore's research in the Journal of Clinical Nursing, entitled An International E-Delphi Study on Research Priorities. 360 respondents to this Delphi study from 20 countries. 6% of them come from England. Now, 74% of that 6 said reduce duplication. So when we look at N, we're probably looking at a dozen nurses. This is one of the reasons why the student who comes to me with this project is going to get a rather blunt response. The fact that all these products are out there, does it necessarily impinge on the quality of care? Is there evidence for that? I can see some very experienced people in the audience. Can any of you tell me that there really is evidence that the fact we've got these dressings reduces the quality of care? Because nobody is working from a formulary with 470 foams. They're working from a very much smaller formulary. Yes, there are too many formularies. Why on earth we've all had to reinvent the wheel defies logic. Are we going to end up with one foam, one hydrocolloid, one superabsorbent polymer, or not? The Cochrane wound people look for evidence from RCTs. I think they go way over the top, and I've said this publicly time and time again. But now we're going to embark on an exercise which is not going to take in formal health economic principles, nor an RCT on the basis of what the Cochrane folks might want. We're taking a wholly different approach. And again, baseline evidence from where we come. Now, the methodology, Mandy's told us, that's good. Is it validated? We know who's going to contribute, who's going to monitor the outcomes, how are they going to be reported. Let's look at the focus. A lot of people aren't aware of this because it hasn't quite yet been in print. But Julian Guest has published on the Health Improvement Network data on the wounds and cost of wounds in the UK to the NHS. And Julian's figures abstracted from the Health Improvement Network are an estimation of £5.3 billion per annum for 2.2 million wounds. And one of the interesting things he found, which was reported at Harrogate last year in November, was that given the limitations of the study period, which he looked at, only 43% of the chronic wounds healed at 135% of the cost of the healed wound. Now, to me, patient care being paramount and savings being equally important, not quite equally important, a little less important, let's focus on that. Let's focus on better education for you guys and the guys that aren't here, because you at least have turned up for the conference, but the ones who cannot come or don't want to come or who are not allowed to come, and let's not forget that, nurse education is not a matter of personal choice. Come and better use the products that are available to heal more wounds. But isn't that the difficult one, I ask you? That's the difficult one. The easier one is to cut the budget. 80%, clinically acceptable to 80%. This is a term that was used last year, and I don't know whether it's a constraint that you have to work to. But the medical device directives, which is a part of English law as well as European law, we have CE marked products which currently meet, if the product has a CE mark, the statutory requirements for being, quote, fit for purpose. If they are not fit for purpose, in what way are they not performing? If they're not performing, grey card notification to the MHRA should have happened. You can't have it both ways. You cannot arbitrarily say, this product isn't fit for purpose because I think so, or because this study shows it isn't, when we live in a regulatory environment which states that it is. Patient choice. Naomi gave us a very good presentation on patient choice earlier. It wasn't totally focused on patient choice, admittedly, but it had a good component of patient choice. Proms, we've been through all this. Is there a patient component to this exercise? I hope there will be. I do hope there will be. This is not a criticism that I suspect there won't be, but it's simply a word to say, I'm watching, and others are watching too. We'll support you if everything is above board and transparent and valid, but this time that it becomes shaky, you'll find that we'll do our best to expose. The biggest question of all, the impact on the quality of care. And this rather trite question at the end, well, who really worries about that? Thanks very much.
Okay. I'm not going to give either party a chance for rebuttal because we could be here all day. What I am going to do is open this to you. I just want to make a few comments, and I hope they're broad observations, so I don't want to come down on anybody's side. I think we've had a mixture there, some facts and some emotion, And I understand there's a lot of emotion in this. For many of you, there is a lot of feelings running high. And it's good to see that reflected, but it's also good to have some facts and some underpinning. I think there have been quite a lot of comments that are about process and also about communication. I think whilst Mandy tried to address some of those, we are at very early stages, and we will know more about the process, I hope, as this evolves. I also think there seems to have been a little bit of smoke and mirrors, not picking on either side, but I'm just going to pick on the Nursing Times reference. I took that Nursing Times reference as it was a Nursing Times reference. I haven't read the paper, so I don't know if I know there was a survey done in Nursing Times, because I filled it in, so I know it existed. But I don't know whether that reference comes from a reference to another bit in there or from an answer to it. However, what I would say, is there anybody in this room who doesn't think that we could do with looking at reviewing the dressings? So whatever the size of that figure, I think it's a fairly common sense fact. So let's not get distracted by some things that may have been put in there as slight red herrings. So I want to open it to the audience. And what I would like is for you to wait for the microphone, because I think it's important that we hear the question. And I would like you to give your name and who you are, and then a question. If you want to address the question to somebody specifically, please say so. If it's a general question, I will say who it's for, and I may well cut people short if the debate is going on too long. Any questions? I expect you all to leap in. Pauline, run forward. There's a lady there.
Hello, Emma Openshaw. I'm from Sunderland Hospital. Obviously, in the past, we've had prone, where we had the tissue viabilities do regional wound care formularies using matrices. Is that going to be looked at? Because some regions continued this work and have continued to make cost-cutting in their trusts by working collaboratively.
Okay. Mandy, do you want to answer?
Yeah, we're going to look at every single thing that's out there. And what we need you to do is to flag it up to us. We can look at regional work, we can look at individual trust work where trusts have said they want to be involved with us. We know there are cross-health economy pieces of work that have been done between acute trusts, mental health trusts, community trusts, CCGs, etc. This is about looking at everything that's been done before. And the more evidence that we can get to look, because you know what, if the evidence was the evidence was the evidence, we should all have the same formulary, shouldn't we? If you think of it in that simplistic form. So what we need to do is not discard the work that people have done. What we want to do is just gather it all together, because everybody is spending a lot of time doing their own thing. And the issue, you know, I have to say this because it's really, really important. And I only had 20 minutes. Quality is the key of this as clinicians. The savings come in being able to do the national procurement. Okay? It's a bit like buying in bulk, to use that analogy.
Okay, thank you. I think that's a reasonable answer. Are there any additional questions? Tina, you had your hand up.
Jacqui, can I make a comment on that?
You can make a comment. I thought it was a reasonable answer, but do.
You know, given that I was responding on the basis of last year's exercise, and what Mandy has said today is the first time I've heard it too, but there's one area where I think huge savings can be made, and it's in your hands. Every time I go into the house on domiciliary visit of a patient with a wound, I see a huge box of dressings, which can in some cases amount to nearly hundreds of pounds, but in many cases amount to thousands of pounds, and I do know the costs of these things. And you can help that by not switching a dressing every week, but switching dressings according to the needs of the wound and the patient. So yeah, I'm perfectly happy to be even-handed, but I see that almost as a universal thing, that patients at home are going to have a huge box of dressings. And it's untenable.
Thank you, Richard. I'm conscious we've got a couple of questions, so I'm going to do Tina next.
I suppose mine isn't really so much a question as such, but a number of comments on what both we both have said at the moment. One of the examples Mandy gave was about the reduction of catheter-acquired infections. And I felt very much that the key thing there was not actually the procurement of the packs, but actually the education that went along with that. And with dressings, the fact that we waste so much money on dressings, often with the box of dressings and things like that, because different people are changing things, because there's not enough education and knowledge, real knowledge out there to get it right. So I feel that education bit needs to go hand in hand. The product itself, in many ways, is secondary to that. I think the comment about the number of lines of, for example, films dressings, and I could see perhaps that somebody that doesn't look at the catalogue and actually see that, there might be 10 brands, and those 10 brands, there's the different sizes, and they all have a number, so a product line with those. And film dressings, we use some film dressings in wound care, but there are a lot of film dressings used for IV access, PICC lines, that are very specialist in their nature. And again, they come in different sizes for paediatrics and things like that, and that all adds to the product line. So, do you know what I mean? We can't think that we need to reduce, have a target to reduce the number of product lines as such, because getting the right size dressing for the wound is incredibly important. So just a couple of comments, really.
Thank you. Do you want to reply?
Just very briefly, I totally agree with you. It wasn't, as I said, the issue wasn't about the procurement savings. They were very minimal. The issue was about the standardisation and staff knowing exactly how to use one particular pack. I think it was the practice that changed. And we have already discussed that as these products are identified, that when we come up with the list, there will be education. We've been thinking about all sorts of comms and education that can go out with them. So I think education is really important, because if you don't know how to put a product on properly, then it does fall off and you use another one. So education is going to be a big part of that. And I acknowledge what you're saying about different sizes.
There's a question at the back, Sue. Right at the back, in the middle, unfortunately.
My name is Sue Mason. I'm Tissue Viability Lead in Staffordshire and Stoke-on-Trent community. We've just done our formally. We changed it over. And with the changeover, we're going to save about £500,000 in the year. And we do total purchase as well. So I understand what Richard's saying, because that does make a massive difference to us. But there are people, and you're right, Mandy, there are people doing this already. It's about having that engagement, I think. I've already engaged with Sian, so she knows what we're doing, but there's lots of people doing this. So I think bringing this all together is the best way forward. I really do.
Thank you.
Thank you. A comment to my left here.
Teresa Mitchell, Tissue Viability Lead, Live Well South West. I'd just like to echo what Sue has just said. We've just put an awful lot of work into trying to implement total purchase. We had many barriers because obviously with pharmacists and the costs that incorporated through generating a prescription. But one of the main focuses, it wasn't just about the cost savings, although that obviously was a big thing, but it was mainly about getting the patient the dressing more speedily, because at the moment patients are waiting ages for dressing. So they can wait up to 2 weeks. So obviously we've put quite a lot of work into that, and it's just kind of wondering how all this is going to impact on everything. But I certainly agree we have to think about a different way of procuring dressings for patients, because it's not acceptable that they're waiting 2 weeks at a time for a dressing. And it's also not acceptable that so much money is being wasted. We had a dressings amnesty, and that equated to £5,400, and that was from 4 district nursing bases. So I totally agree, it's a huge, huge waste of money. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions? There's a hand at the back here.
Sorry, ladies.
Hi, I'm Sarah Bradbury. I'm a clinical nurse specialist at Medicare Plus. I just wanted to know if, in effect, when you're introducing a national formulary, you're removing competition from the marketplace over the period that formulary is in place for until you're reviewed. Will that actually affect the ability of the NHS to get the best deal financially when you're removing the competition? And also, bearing in mind the amount of innovation that comes from a collaboration between clinical people and industry itself, are you also then removing the incentive for innovation to take place if you're almost shutting the door for that innovation to be put into the marketplace until the next formulary review?
In relation to that, I think we're always going to want innovation because we're always going to want the best product. As I said to you before, the issue here is about getting the best product for the best price because it would be procured at such a high number. So in response to your question about is it going to stop innovation, hand on heart, I don't know whether it will or not. I think we are always going to need innovation, the research, the development, the best products for patients. We are always going to need them, and that is going to continue. But again, just like Naomi said, some of the evidence that we have, but you know, particularly from the companies, we can't even do a proper evaluation because it's so poor. Why am I doing this? I'm doing this to try to make best value savings for the NHS.
Okay, thank you. There's a couple of, I think, comments about this. I think it was Heidi, then David, and then there's a lady over here. Heidi?
Heidi Sandos, Chair of TVS and leading us for wound care with Accelerate Kick in Tower Hamlets. Actually, my comments to you guys sat out here and everybody else. The guest paper told us that there are people out there with lower limb wounds that aren't getting the proper assessments that they need. If they're not getting the proper assessments, they're not getting the proper treatment. If they're not getting the proper treatment, we as clinicians are wasting money on using the wrong dressings. So actually, you know, the passion that's gone into this particular debate for the last few months has fascinated me. We've put a lot of energy into it when there's a lot of people with lower limb ulcers living out there that aren't getting the care that they should have. And I wish we could put the same amount of passion into that. So that's my challenge to all of you guys. So that goes back to Mandy's point about education, access to services, you know, real outcomes for our patients. Let's do what we know our patients need, and the dressings will follow. The dressings that are coming out are Me Too products mostly. So there is some innovation out there, but actually I haven't seen a huge amount in the last few years. It's mainly Me Too. So that's just my challenge. I haven't really got a comment to either of you guys, but that's my challenge to us as clinicians.
Can we then pass the microphone to David? You had something to say, or has that over? Well, can we keep it short?
We can keep it short. A couple of myths I just want to sort of set aside, please. There will be no national formulary. We don't know where that term has come from, but it's not come from the National Clinical Evaluation Team. There will be no national formulary for wound care.
Can somebody write that down, please? Heidi's tweeting that right away.
That's fine. Tweet away. The other thing to say is the work we do every day generates innovation. It does not stifle innovation. We generate innovation through engagement with clinical staff, through listening to where there are current gaps in provision, current issues which slow down patient care, which prevent us doing the very best that Professor, and I forget his first, Richard, is that right?
Yes.
That Prof was talking about. If we deliver care that gives us good outcomes, quality outcomes for our patients, and supports that entire process, that's an innovation. Giving me a product that's got lemon impregnated X, Y, and Z does not give me innovation. That gives me a marketing USP to think, ooh, that's a bit dull. Where does it fit? What does it do? So true innovation comes from our process and through the engagement. So engage with us and we'll innovate with you.
Thank you, David. There's something over here. I couldn't see who it was, but I know I'm being waved at.
Hello, my name's Julie Smith. I'm the editor of British Journal of Nursing, and I work on the Journal of Wound Care as well. Earlier, the issue with communication was raised, and I was just wondering, going forward, what the plan is to communicate this process to TVNs and nurses within the community and other areas.
You're actually getting a bit of a preview. This team isn't launched till May. It's been launched nationally at the Nursing Times Nurse Directors Conference with CNO on the 17th, 18th of May. It's just that because of the furore, I had a conversation with Heidi about how we could just try to facilitate bringing you up to date with where we were, because you're such an important group. So a lot of the questions that you're asking at the moment is still very much work in progress, because, as I said, some of the team aren't even full-time yet. What we are going to be doing, there will be a national comms strategy, okay, and that will come out on the launch. So there's going to be a national comms strategy, there's going to be a website, there's going to be national events. So, and we want to hear from you through your networks about how the best way is to engage. So there will be a dedicated website, chat page, where people can talk to the team. We'll be facilitating national meetings and forums and workshops. So, and if you've got any other... Oh, the other thing we're thinking of is social media. So all of that is work in progress. But if any of you've got any ideas, please let us know, because the launch is in May.
Right. I'm conscious of time. Is it a really burning thing? Oh, it's Paul. Paul, in quick.
Sorry, it's more of a comment and a question, I suppose. I'm looking at it from two sides. I've been out of practice for a wee while, and I've just come back and seen a lot of changes that's gone on in wound care in the last 16 months. And I've got two things that are sitting in the back of my head. One is, as an organisation, if the process comes out that they look at the cheaper products, as in unit cost products, which is, let's face it, it's going to be quite a strong temptation to make the savings is to go for cheaper products. How are we going to validate that against the quality for our patients? But then the positive part of me thinks, well, no, perhaps, this is going to be an open and transparent process, and you are going to look at products that are probably more expensive than the generics, and yet you've got some trusts that have been spending the last 6 months going for cheaper products to make the savings. So if we standardise at a product that's more expensive to the trust's current standardised product, that's going to have a negative financial impact on individual trusts. How is this process going to accommodate that sort of issue?
Because it falls under the CARTA work stream. So trusts are going to be measured on their collaboration and compliance with what will be CARTA's model hospital. And part of that will be, there's a whole work stream of that around procurement. And as you saw, the last bullet point in that slide was around CARTA's national, whatever we want to call it, formulary or whatever. And NHSI, now as they are going to be interested in looking at trust compliance with the products that are recommended nationally as part of their performance framework.
Right, can I just give Richard one last comment, because he's been very patient.
You asked for burning issues. Burns is the issue. The exercise that started last year really wasn't well represented, and the British Burns Association, the clinicians that are involved with that, were really quite put out.
Neither were podiatry.
Will this involve Burns dressings?
I don't know yet. I think we're starting... is that in the remit?
OK, can I just say, I'm conscious it's now 3:30 and we're drawing to a close. As I start, can I ask you to put, I think it was Mandy's last slide that had an email contact address on? Yeah. Because what has been said repeatedly is, if you are doing work, please contact us. So you've had those names up there, so I'm sure some of you know those people, and if you don't, you'll know people who know those people. But let's put the email address up. I think my summary of it all was, for me, it's been very useful to hear what actually is happening, not what may or may not be happening, and actually a lot of us had got it wrong. I would say I still have some hesitation, I still have some concerns. I understand we can make some savings on dressings. You all know that because you are all doing it. What I would really like to see taken forward as part of the CARTA review is a much bigger review about the processes of wound care, and I think that was reflected in a couple of the comments, because you and I both know that the big savings are from the right assessment, a quick referral, the patient seeing the right patient, not from the dressings. So I'm going to leave that with you, and I'm handing back, I think, to Heidi, once she's tweeted, to round us off. Can I thank both of our participants for being very calm and very factual. Thank you.